Okay, I'm going to talk through Beyond the Sky and the Earth, A Journey into Bhutan by Jamie Zepper. This is in preparation for your Edexcel IGCSE English Language exam, paper 1. Let me just bring my mic closer because I've had a few people email me saying they can't hear me that clearly. So hopefully this will be better. Many of you have emailed me, so thank you for that, asking where the videos are, because I did say they were going to start again last week. After I finished my Masters, I did get quite ill. Oh, that sounds an exaggeration. I had a bad cold. So that's put me behind a little bit. I'm going to try and post extra ones this week to catch up. So hopefully they'll be in time for everyone's exams. I know they're coming up soon. My students are starting their exams at the same time, and I have every intention of having all the videos on before that time. So please just bear with me. Okay, let's have a look at the title. Beyond the Sky and the Earth. You could say is hyperbolic, so there is a sense of adventure with the title, but it also emphasises the great distance. This really does feel like a completely different world away for Jamie Zepper. It's also a memoir. So the purpose really is to share her personal experience. It's a little bit different, I would argue, to just travel writing, where it might not be as personal. So you are going to kind of learn about her own take on Bhutan rather than a more general idea of the place. Okay. I will read paragraph by paragraph and then go through my my notes. It's worth mentioning now that I've read lots and lots of different interpretations of this, and people seem to have very different ideas, and that's obviously absolutely fine. So just keep an open mind. This is just my interpretation, and you can obviously form your own opinion on this. I've taken the opinion that initially she doesn't seem to like Bhutan. She's not particularly excited by it, and then we see a turning point where that seems to change. I've read plenty of interpretations that do not see it in that way, so just please keep an open mind. Okay, mountains all around, climbing up to peaks, rolling into valleys again and again. Bhutan is all and only mountains. I know the technical explanation for the landscape, landmass meeting landmass, the Indian subcontinent colliding into Asia 30 or 40 million years ago, but I cannot imagine it. It is easier to picture a giant child gathering earth in great armfuls, piling up rock, pinching mud into ridges and sharp peaks, knuckling out little valleys and gorges, poking holes for water to fall through. So immediately we get this sense of what the landscape is like. So we know that a lot of Bhutan is mountains, and we know this through the repetition of again and again. And that follows basically with saying Bhutan is all and only mountains. So all and only really reiterates the kind of scope of this terrain, and it just seems to go on and on. It's never ending. I would argue, especially the word only, creates a sense of negativity, almost like there's not much to Bhutan to get excited about. That's the way I read this at the beginning. I know many have not. It's interesting that she cannot imagine it. She understands technically what happened and how this landscape is the way it is, but the fact that she can't imagine it suggests that this landscape is nothing like what she's seen before. And could that, and we'll come back to this, could that create a sense of is she intimidated by the landscape because she's never seen anything like it before? She's a long way from home, and is that why we have this sense that she's not that excited about it? Also notice plosives. I should have circled these. I haven't really made this that clear, but you've got picture, gathering, great, pile, pinch, sharp, peaks, knuckling, so the p and the k and the g sound, poking. So all of those are plosive sounds. Those are harsh sounds which reflect the harsh terrain that she's witnessing for the first time. So again, I think this creates this sense that almost the terrain seems threatening to her, And again, is that just because it's really the unknown for her at this point? Because as we know in the next paragraph, it's her first night there. So is this just all a little bit overwhelming for her? So it's her first night in Thimphu, the capital, a 90-minute drive from the airport in Perot. It took 5 different flights over 4 days to get here, from Toronto to Montreal to Amsterdam to New Delhi to Calcutta to Perot. I'm exhausted, but I cannot sleep. From my simple pine-panelled room at the Druk Sherik Hotel, I watch mountains rise to meet the moon. I used to wonder what was on the other side of mountains, how the landscape resolved itself beyond the immediate wall in front of you. Flying in from the baked brown plains of India this morning, I found out. On the other side of mountains are mountains, and more mountains again. The entire earth below us was a convulsion of crests and gorges and wind-sharpened pinnacles. Just past Everest, I caught a glimpse of the Just past Everest, I caught a glimpse of the Tibetan Plateau, the edge of a frozen desert 4,500 metres above sea level. Thimphu's altitude is about half of that, but even here, the winter air is thin and dry and very cold. So before I talk through those notes, I should have really Googled how to pronounce the capital. So apologies if I'm mispronouncing it. So it's a fresh experience that could explain why she is feeling a little intimidated by the terrain. We know it's a 90-minute drive from the airport, so she's already mentioning this or creating this sense of isolation. It's an hour and a half from the airport. She had to take 5 different flights over 4 days. Now, she could have just finished the sentence there, but the fact that she then lists all the places she had to fly to before finally getting here helps emphasize how far away she is from home. So again, that adds to this sense of isolation. I'm going to jump a little bit to keep adding to that point. She then says on the other sides of mountains are mountains, more mountains and more mountains again. So that listing and the word again and the repetition of mountains all helps emphasize this endlessness of this terrain. And 1, it could be really romantic, or 2, or she could feel in awe of it, or 2, she feels really isolated, like she can't escape it. It's just never ending. And I think it's the latter. I think she's overwhelmed by this terrain at this point. But please obviously offer multiple interpretations in your answers. There is some almost romantic imagery. I watch mountains rise to meet the moon. So there's personification. So there is that small sense of wonder. But I feel like because it follows with, I used to wonder what was on the other side of mountains. She used to have that sense of wonder. She used to have that sense of awe. But now she realises it's just more mountains, mountains, mountains and mountains again. So I think she's kind of lost that sense of wonder, at least at this point. Again, we have plosive sounds, which I haven't labelled here, so please do with your own work. Convulsion, crests, gorges, wind-sharpened pinnacles. So we've got that sense of harshness again, almost a violent terrain with the word convulsion as well. So I think that just helps support this idea that she feels a little threatened. She feels isolated. She's just unsure, I think, of where she is. She's feeling a little out of place. And then she describes the air as thin and dry and very cold. She uses syndetic listing where you, instead of using commas, continually use and that just exaggerates. It can make a list seem even longer, and that's what she's doing here. I think she's exaggerating the conditions, but notice the type of language she's using as well. It's very factual, it's very informative, there's not much description really. So there just seems to be this lack of excitement for Zeppa at this point. The next morning I share breakfast of instant coffee, powdered milk, plasticky white bread and flavourless red jam in the hotel with 2 other Canadians who have signed on to teach in Bhutan for 2 years. Lorna has golden brown hair, freckles and a no-nonsense, home on the farm demeanour that is frequently shattered by her ringing laughter and stories of the wild characters that populate her life in Saskatchewan. Sasha from British Columbia is slight and dark with an impish smile. After breakfast, we have a brief meeting with Gordon, the field director of the WUSC programme in Bhutan, and then walk along the main road of Thimphu. Both Lorna and Sasha have travelled extensively. Lorna trekked all over Europe and Northern Africa, and Sasha worked for a year in an orphanage in Bombay. They are both ecstatic about Bhutan so far, and I stay close to them, hoping to pick up some of their enthusiasm. So, we look at the adjectives she uses to describe her breakfast. She is clearly unimpressed by the food, and does that reflect her feelings about Bhutan at this point as well? But notice the descriptive detail she gives to the two girls in comparison, Lorna and Sasha. That it suggests, and also if you compare that to the way she describes Gordon, which is in very little detail, it suggests that she probably has more investment in these girls. She probably did get to know them a lot more. And I can imagine that she probably feels a lot closer to them, having lived there for some time as well. I haven't put this down, but it's worth mentioning as well that they've travelled extensively. So Lorna's trekked all over Europe and Northern Africa. Sasha worked for an orphanage in Bombay. And I think it's their experience that gives her comfort, and that's why she wants to stay close to them. So she feels vulnerable and anxious, and these girls are a source of comfort for her. They're also really enthusiastic about the experience, and this is why I think she's not that enthusiastic, because she hopes to pick up some of their enthusiasm. So I think she's indirectly telling us there that she's not that excited at this point about her experience ahead. Although Thimphu's official population is 20,000, it seems even smaller. It doesn't even have traffic lights. Blue-suited policemen stationed at 2 intersections along the main street direct the occasional truck or Land Cruiser, using incomprehensible but graceful hand gestures. The buildings all have the same pitched roof, trefoil I think you pronounce, windows and heavy beams painted with lotus flowers, jewels and clouds. One-storied shops with wooden shuttered windows open onto the street. They seem to be selling the same things: onions, rice, milk powder, dried fish, plastic buckets and metal plates, quilts and packages of stale soft cookies from India, bourbon biscuits, coconut crunchies, and the hideously coloured orange cream biscuits. There are more signs of the outside world than I had expected. Teenagers in acid-washed jeans, Willie Nelson's greatest hits after the news in English on the Bhutan Broadcasting Service, a Rambo poster in a bar. Overall, these signs of cultural infiltration are few, but they are startling against the Bhutanese-ness of everything else. So it's interesting that she finds it even smaller, considering the way she feels at this point. I wonder if it almost feels a bit claustrophobic for her, or does it seem even smaller because it seems so simple and there are so many limits that she goes to talk about. For instance, she follows with it doesn't even have traffic lights. So this short sentence, I would argue, offers a tone of disappointment, especially the word even. And the adjective occasional helps paint this image of this sleepy town. And everything's really traditional and everything's the same. Now that can be really beautiful, to have everything the same, but I don't know if I get that from her. Especially when you look at the list of products. It's an odd assortment, but it does suggest a really simple lifestyle of the things that you might need day to day. And there is a sign of her own judgment and dislike for the things that are on offer, with her description of the cookies being stale and the biscuits being hideous. The modernism's quite funny, I find, because it's actually decades behind, and I think that helps highlight the difference between Bhutan and where she would be from in Canada. That what they consider modern is still actually really, really old-fashioned. We're talking decades behind. So does that help exaggerate the distance between where she's from and Bhutan? Not only geographically, but almost in time as well. They just seem to be so far behind the times in comparison. The town itself looks very old, with cracked sidewalks and faded paintwork, but Gordon told us that it didn't exist 30 odd years ago. Before the 60s, when the third king decided to make it the capital, it was nothing but rice paddies, a few farmhouses, and I'm not sure how to pronounce this, a dong, one of the fortresses that are scattered throughout the country. Thimphu is actually new. Thimphu will look like New York to you when you come back after a year in the East, he said. So there seems to be this surprising juxtaposition where things already seem to be worn out, cracked sidewalks, faded paintwork, but it's only 30 years old. Well, 30 years new, you might say. So it just seems that to her a little worn out already. But there is a huge contrast between where it's come from. 30 years ago, it was rice paddies and a few farmhouses. So it's come a long, long way in those 30 years. And the adverb actually indicates her surprise that actually this is a new place, even though it seems so worn out already. So Gordon tells her that it will look like New York once she comes back after a year in the East. And I think what follows is this descriptive detail to justify why she thinks it will never look like that for her. At the end of the main road is Tashiko Dzong, the seat of the royal government of Bhutan, a grand, whitewashed, red-roofed, golden-tipped fortress built in the traditional way without blueprints or nails. Beyond, hamlets are connected by footpaths and terraced fields, barren now, climb steadily from the river and merge into forest. Thimphu will never look like New York to me, I think. So those details, I think, just help justify that it is so different. Real traditional details as well, the red-roofed, golden-tipped fortress, the hamlets as well. It's quite an archaic word. We don't have hamlets really anymore, well, in the modern world. And I've indicated here with this blue line, this is where I think there's a turning point. Have a look now at her descriptive detail. I think there's much more enthusiasm. There's an admiration that's present beyond this point. The Bhutanese are a very handsome people. The best built race of men I ever saw, wrote to Misery George Bogle on his way to Tibet in 1774, and I find I agree. Of medium height and sturdily built, they have beautiful aristocratic faces with dark almond-shaped eyes, high cheekbones and gentle smiles. Both men and women wear their black hair short. The women wear a kira, a brightly striped ankle-length dress, and the men a go, a knee-length robe that resembles a kimono, except that the top part is exceptionally voluminous. The Bhutanese of Nepali origin tend to be taller, with sharper features and darker complexions. They too wear the go and kira. People look at us curiously, but they do not seem surprised at our presence. Although we see few other foreigners in town, we know they are here. Gordon said something this morning about Thimphu's small but friendly expat community. So I'll just draw your attention to the descriptive details. She presents them as aesthetically striking, but also with the adjective gentle, also friendly as well. So I think that potentially helps her anxiety, and also mentioning the fact that there's this small but friendly expat community. Is this going to be a source of companionship, an intimate group for her that will be comforting for her while she's here away from home? When we stop and ask for directions at a hotel, the young man behind the counter walks with us to the street, pointing out the way, explaining politely in impeccable English. I search for the right word to describe the people, for the quality that impresses me most dignity, unself-consciousness, good humour, grace, but can find no single word to hold all of my impressions. So she clearly has a positive perception of the people. She mentions the man speaks to her politely. He has impeccable English. She's so in awe of them that she can't even find a word. She tries to offer some, and they are all very, very positive. Dignity, unself-consciousness, good humour, grace, but none of them will do. None of them sum up just how impressed she is by them. So I think that speaks volumes for the way she feels about the people. And again, I think this helps explain why there's that turning point. She's starting to appreciate the people. In Thimphu, we attended a week-long orientation session with 12 other Irish, British, Australian and New Zealand teachers new to Bhutan. Our first lessons in Bhutanese history are the most interesting. Historical records show that waves of Tibetan immigrants settled in Bhutan sometime before the 10th century, but the area is thought to have been inhabited long before that. In the 8th century, the Indian saint, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, Padmasambhava, brought Buddhism to the area, where it absorbed many elements of Bon, the indigenous shamanist religion. The new religion took hold but was not a unifying force. The area remained a collection of isolated values, each ruled by its own king. When the Tibetan Lama or is it Ayama, Nawang Namgyel arrived in 1616, he set about unifying the valleys under one central authority and gave the country the name Druk Yul, meaning land of the thunder dragon. Earlier names for Bhutan are just as beautiful. The Tibetans knew the country as the southern land of medicinal herbs and the south sandalwood country. Districts within Bhutan were even more felicitously named: Rainbow District of Desires, Lotus Grove of the Gods, Blooming Valley of Luxuriant Fruits, the Land of Longing and Silver Pines. Bhutan, the name by which the country came to be known to the outside world, is thought to be derived from Bhutanta, meaning the end of Tibet, or from the Sanskrit Bhutan, meaning highlands. So here, don't want to go into huge detail about this, but I just think the length of the amount of detail that she gives to their history indicates a great interest for this place now. And I think maybe that week-long orientation actually worked for her. She's grown this great appreciation for the history, and I think with that maybe has come a huge respect for the country that it is now. I think the old names for Bhutan really help emphasize the beauty as well. Also, not to mention that, the fact that she had this week-long orientation with other Western foreigners could have been also a source of comfort for her and have changed her perception of this feeling. While the rest of Asia was being overrun by Europeans of varying hue but similar cry, only a handful of Westerners found their way into Bhutan. 2 Portuguese Jesuits came to call in 1627, and 6 British missions paid brief but cordial visits from the late 1700s until the middle of the next century. Relations with the British took a nasty turn during the disastrous visit of Ashley Eden in 1864. Eden, who had gone to sort out a small problem of the Bhutanese raids on the British territory, had his back slapped, his hair pulled, and his face rubbed with wet dough, and was then forced to sign an outrageous treaty that led to a brief war between the British and the Bhutanese. Considering the consolidated British Empire in the south, and the great game being played out in the north between the colonial powers, Bhutan's preservation of its independence was remarkable. I'm full of admiration for this small country that has managed to look after itself so well. So there's a juxtaposition here that highlights Bhutanese's different history to the rest of Asia. So while the rest of Asia was really being overrun by Europeans during colonial time, that didn't happen to Bhutan, and actually there's just very few Westerners who managed to find their way there. So that is a source, that's something that's really impressive to Zeppa as well. I haven't really highlighted anything here, but you could mention that maybe there's an element here that she's looking at this from a Western perspective. She does say things like, where is it? Eden, who had gone to sort out a small problem of the Bhutanese raids on the British territory. There's an element here of gone to sort out. It's like that old colonial way of thinking where the white man has to go over and sort things out and tell the Asian person how to do it themselves. That sense of patronising element that's so linked with colonial powers. So you could argue that's the case, and the fact that I don't know anything about this treaty that he was forced to sign, but she is showing her personal opinion by saying it was an outrageous treaty that he had to sign. So there's a sense there where she is seeing this from a Western point of view, and that might be unfair. She does, however, show that she is really impressed with them, the fact that they maintain their independence in comparison to many Asian countries that didn't. However, again, is there a patronising tone? I'm full of admiration for this small country that has managed to look after itself so well. Something quite patronising about that. It's almost like, you find a child that's had to look after themselves for an hour and you go, I can't believe you looked after yourself. You've done so well. I'm so impressed. Something a little bit patronising about it that doesn't sit well for me. But at least does show us a difference in perception from the author.